What were the facts you learned in school that are no longer true? Part 1. You're not going to have a calculator everywhere you go. In India, we were taught math without calculators, and so even the dumbest of nuts could do some sort of mental math. Then we all went to university where we could use the technology of calculators. By the next semester, I was double checking if 4 plus 2 equaled 6. The food pyramid. So I'm not supposed to eat 700,000 calories a day? Seriously, I could never wrap my head around that. 45 to 56 servings of bread a day? While true that the infectious agents aren't necessarily the cause of incapacitation, it is definitely true that commando dragons harbor some of the most outrageous bacterial populations in their mouth. There is a ton of work going into research of Komodo because of what we can learn about antibiotics and bacterial resistance from a creature with such diverse and rare normal flora. I was told more recently that they have both bacteria and venom. Also, on one of those nature documentary shows narrated by Attenberg, there was a water buffalo being followed by dragons for days, telling me that either the venom sometimes acts slowly or sometimes they opt to kill by microbial infection instead. The dragon kept licking the wound. I think the venom stopped the blood clotting and the buffalo kept bleeding, eventually getting very weak and collapsing. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from space. But space is visible from the Great Wall of China. The tongue has different taste zones. Oh, I remember that. I tried that myself many times. I was never able to replicate the experiment. Could not imagine back then that there was any chance that information written in a book could be so wrong. So I concluded that my tongue is broken, or I don't know how to experiment. Pluto was a planet when I was at school. It's a cold celestial dwarf. When I was a kid, we were taught that penguins' feet didn't freeze because of their circulation. Turns out they have antifreeze proteins in their blood that bind to ice crystals and stop them from growing so their blood stays liquid, well below 0 degrees. Source: worked at a university research center with a guy that did his PhD in antifreeze proteins. They have a number of adaptations to help solve the cold feet problem. It is super cool, IMO. Basically, the tissues are structured differently to conserve and maximize blood use, and the return veins from the feet overlap closely with the downward arterial network. This allows the cold blood coming back from the foot to be warmed enough by the hot blood going out, which equalizes their temperature, so the returning blood won't send the penguin into shock. A very similar mechanism is in human testicles to maintain the low temperature of the sperm and high temps of the internal organs. Bodies are so neat. You have to learn in cursive writing. High schooling will not accept anything that isn't cursive. Yes, I remember teachers racing students in handwriting. Teachers would write the alphabet as cursive and students would do it in print. This was the only argument they used as to why cursive was better. Then high school came and no one wrote in cursive and everything we handed in had to be typed. Joke's on them. I combine cursive and print when I write. Sometimes even, I can't read what I wrote. There is a country called Czechoslovakia. And a year or so ago, the Czech government changed the name to Czechia. That two blue-eyed parents can't have a brown-eyed child. Apparently, not only is this pure myth, the genetics of eye color is more complex than that. It led to a lot of kids being rejected by their real fathers before DNA testing became available. My son was taught that you had to have the same blood type as one of your parents. He told his teacher that his dad is O+, I'm A+, and yet he is O-. And the teacher gave him a funny look and told him that maybe he should have a talk. He came home in a panic and asked if he was the result of an affair. I was so pissed. Of course I had to be sarcastic about it. You figured it out. Dad cheated on me and got pregnant, which is the only way this could happen because you look just freaking like him. He calmed down, did a bit of research, then apologized. I was taught in grade school that we had to know the metric system because the United States was going to adopt it like any day now, for sure. That was about 30 years ago. The US moving towards the metric system, inch by inch. Christopher Columbus was the first dude to discover America and tried to bargain with the Indians, but couldn't work it out because of cultural differences. In grade school during the 70s, we were also taught that he sailed west to prove the world was round. You're born with a set number of brain cells, and that number can only diminish throughout your life. I believe this myth arises from the fact that neurons, nerve cells, usually do not undergo cell division. This is why damage to the spinal cord can cause permanent paralysis. However, the brain does contain cells other than neurons, which are capable of cell division. These cells are called the glial cells and serve a variety of different functions: repair, myelin, synthesis, etc. So while the number of brain cells can increase, the number of neurons pretty much only diminishes over time. I don't know how much common it is, but if the Earth were 1 centimeter closer to the Sun, we would be burnt. 1 centimeter further from the Sun, we would be frozen thing. No, we wouldn't. The distance is changing all the time during a year. No one better jump then. Forget jumping. If you're a couple of inches shorter or taller than your friend, at least one of you is screwed. Elliptical orbit. Interesting? Not sure if the flat earthers will agree though. The difference between the closest, January, and the furthest, July, is about 3 million miles. Current estimates say Earth wouldn't be somewhere you'd want to live if it were much more than a few million miles closer to the Sun because of greenhouse effect. But with our current atmosphere, we could be all the way out by Mars and still be okay, if a bit chilly. That's around 50 million miles further than we are now, or about 150% of our current average distance from the Sun. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Nope, just a slogan paid for by Kellogg's. Also, John Harvey Kellogg invented cornflakes because he believed that eating bland food would stop people from masturbating. That fat is the biggest cause of heart disease. Sugar companies paid off scientists to focus the blame off sugar and push it onto fat. Oh right, I remember that. We were always cooking things on pig fat. Then they came with animal fat is unhealthy. We half ignored that as a family. Some years later, actually, vegetable oil is worse than pig fat. Go figure. In psychology class, we learnt about the bystander effect in the Kitty Genovese story, where apparently she was raped and killed. She cried for help, but her neighbors in the building apparently assumed someone else was going to help her. Turns out the story was embellished by a reporter so that it sounded like no one did help her, but her neighbors actually helped and she died on the way to the hospital. Actually, the story was embellished by the police because several neighbors did call the police and no one responded. So the police defended themselves with an aggressive "no one called the police" media push, which was picked up in a big way by the New York Times. But the good news is that the aggressive media coverage of this story and resulting public outrage helped lead to the establishment of the nationwide 911 emergency phone system. There are 5 senses. I'm actually getting my PhD in neural engineering, and it blew my mind when I started learning of all the other ones. Now, it totally bugs me when we were ever taught it. Strictly speaking, there are dozens of senses. Dozens! Which leads to multiple perceptions of being. I think the general subject is quite complicated though, and probably prudent to hold off trying to distinguish the two to children. There's a bunch of stuff we learned, UK, in school, that scientists has since moved on from. A brontosaurus is no longer a thing, now called an apatosaurus. Britain no longer has a desert. Was Dungeness since reclassification. Panda bears were declassified as bears and are now reclassified as bears. Even the way dinosaurs are depicted has changed. Look at velociraptors in Jurassic Park to now have feathers. Actually, the brontosaurus is back. New discoveries have led to paleontologists realizing that brontosaurus is a separate species from the apatosaurus. Most tyrannosauruses were completely feathered and their posture was really long and sprinty. At least, that is what we can believe now after more study. At the time, I was to believe that they were like upright iguanas with big teeth. And we can believe the giant chicken theory right up until someone discovers more evidence that shows they were actually covered in razor wire and had biomechanical implants. Pluto is the 9th and last planet in the solar system. The atom is indivisible. I will be successful if I get an A in every class. They first split the atom in 1917. Apparently my school only heard about it in 2004. My early teachers always said that the Pilgrims and the Indians got along and had a happy Thanksgiving. All was joyous. But when I got to 4th grade, my teacher basically said, everything you know about Thanksgiving is a lie. And sadly, we learned the truth. At least you were taught that in grade 4. My grade 12 Canadian history class still taught that when the settlers came, everything was joyous and the fur trade was a turn-of-the-century operation. Took an Aboriginal class study in university and I was in shock. One of my favorite high school teachers either couldn't at the time or failed to even address the real reasons behind the reserves.